The blacksmith missed her hints, until the orc boss knocked and yelled, "You're fired." Some men can forge steel into weapons that cut through bone. Others can shape iron into gates that hold back armies. But Kale could turn metal into art so delicate it made grown warriors weep. And he was still too blind to see a woman's heart, even when she laid it at his feet like an offering. The Forge of Singing Steel sat at the edge of Thornhaven, a human settlement that had learned to coexist with the orc clans of the Northern Territories after the Treaty of Broken Blades ended 2 decades of war. The forge got its name from the sound Kale's hammer made against the anvil, a clear, ringing note that echoed through the streets like a bell calling the faithful to prayer. Neighbors set their schedules by it. The baker's daughter knew her bread needed to come out when she heard the 7th strike. The stablemaster started feeding the horses after the 12th. Kale had inherited the forge from his father, who'd inherited it from his father before him. 3 generations of metallurgists who understood that iron had moods just like people, stubborn when cold, yielding when hot, temperamental when worked too quickly. The forge itself was a cave of controlled chaos, tools hanging from walls blackened by decades of smoke, barrels of water that hissed and steamed when hot metal kissed them, and a hearth that glowed like a captured sun. The smell was overwhelming: coal smoke, hot metal, and the sharp tang of quenching oil that stuck in your throat and made your eyes water. Kyle was 28, broad-shouldered from years of hammer work, with hands that were more callous than skin and dark hair perpetually dusted with soot. He spoke the language of metal better than he spoke to people. He could tell you the exact temperature of steel by its color. Cherry red meant 1400 degrees, orange meant 1800, yellow-white meant you'd gone too far and ruined it. But ask him to read a woman's expression? You might as well ask him to read ancient Elvish. The first time Commander Grisha walked into his forge, Kale's initial thought was that she wouldn't fit through the door. His second thought was that she was the most terrifying customer he'd ever had. She stood nearly 7 feet tall, though Kale was terrible at estimating heights, so she might have been even taller. Her skin was the deep green of forest moss, darker along her shoulders and arms, where old battle scars created patterns like tree roots growing across her flesh. 2 tusks curved up from her lower jaw, each as thick as Kale's thumb, polished to an ivory sheen that caught the forge light. Her hair was jet black, woven into dozens of intricate braids decorated with small iron rings and bone beads. She wore armor that looked like it had seen 100 battles and won every single one. Leather reinforced with steel plates engraved with symbols Kale didn't recognize but suspected were clan markings. Her eyes were the color of amber with flecks of green, and when she looked at him, Kale felt like a horseshoe being inspected for flaws. "You Kyle?" Her voice was deep, resonant, the kind of voice that didn't need to shout to be heard across a battlefield. "Yes, ma'am. Commander. Kyle wiped his hands on his apron, realized they were probably just spreading more soot around, and gave up. "How can I help you?" She pulled a battle axe from her back with one fluid motion. The weapon was beautiful, cruel, but beautiful. Double-bladed, the steel engraved with flowing patterns that suggested water or wind or something alive. The edge caught the light like a smile. "Edge is dull," she said, setting it on his workbench with surprising gentleness. The wood still groaned under the weight. Kyle picked up the axe, ran his thumb carefully along the blade, turned it in the light. The edge was fine, maybe slightly worn, but nothing that would affect performance in battle. He'd seen kitchen knives in worse condition. "I can sharpen it," he said slowly. "But honestly, Commander, this blade is in excellent shape. Whoever forged this knew what they were doing. The balance is perfect, the steel is high quality, and the edge is dull," she interrupted. "Needs work." "Right, of course." Who was he to argue with a customer, especially one who could probably snap him like a twig? "I can have it ready by tomorrow evening." "Good." She didn't move, just stood there, watching him with those unsettling amber-green eyes. The silence stretched. Kyle shifted uncomfortably. "Was there something else?" "No." Still didn't move. "Okay. Well, I'll take good care of it." "I know." More silence. Kyle glanced at the forge where the fire was starting to die down. He should really add more coal, but the orc commander was still standing there, taking up approximately half of his available floor space, and he wasn't sure if asking her to move would be rude or suicidal. Finally, she turned and walked to the door. Had to duck to avoid hitting her head on the frame. She paused at the threshold. "Name's Grisha," she said without turning around. I'll remember that, Commander Grisha. Just Grisha. And then she was gone, leaving behind the faint scent of leather oil and something else, something sharp and clean like pine needles after rain. Kyle stared at the axe for a long moment. Then he shrugged and got to work. Old Merrick delivered coal the next afternoon. He was 63 years old, missing 2 fingers on his left hand from a youthful encounter with a grinding wheel, and had the irritating habit of clicking his tongue 3 times before saying anything he considered important. He also considered everything important. Click, click, click. That the Orc commander's weapon? How did you... Kale paused his polishing. How do you know whose weapon this is? Click, click, click. Saw her leaving yesterday. Whole street saw her leaving yesterday. Woman that size, you notice. She coming back for it? This evening, yes. Click, click, click. Interesting. What's interesting about a customer picking up their weapon? Merrick just smiled. The knowing, irritating smile of a man who understood something you didn't and enjoyed the mystery of it. He dumped the coal into the bin with more force than necessary, creating a black cloud that made Kale cough. Nothing interesting. Nothing at all. Click, click, click. Just funny how she walked right past Brenner's forge to get to yours. And his is closer to the Orc settlements. Maybe she heard my work is better. Oh, it is better. No question. Merrick wiped his 3-fingered hand on his trousers. Just seems odd she'd need her weapons sharpened so often is all. What are you talking about? This is her first visit. Merrick gave him that look again. The one that said, you poor stupid boy. Then he left, whistling off key. Grisha returned at sunset. The sky was bleeding red and gold through the forge windows when she ducked through the doorway. Finished? She asked. Kyle handed over the axe. He'd spent 6 hours on it, far more than necessary, making sure the edge was perfect, reconditioning the leather grip, even polishing out some tiny scratches in the steel that probably nobody but him would ever notice. She ran her thumb along the blade exactly like he had, testing the edge. Her hands were enormous, each finger as thick as 2 of his, but she handled the weapon with the delicate precision of a jeweler examining a diamond. Good work, she said. Her tusks caught the dying light when she spoke, turning them briefly gold. Thank you. That'll be 2 silver. She paid him 3. When he started to protest, she cut him off. Quality deserves proper payment. I appreciate that, but keep it. Her tone suggested the conversation was over. Kale pocketed the coins. Well, thank you. If you need anything else, I will return. It wasn't a question or a polite possibility. It was a statement of fact, like saying the sun would rise or winter would come. And she did return. 2 weeks later, with a sword that had a loose pommel that wasn't actually loose. 3 weeks after that, with a dagger that needed rebalancing despite being perfectly balanced. A month later, with a mace that she claimed felt wrong, even though Kale couldn't find a single thing wrong with it. Each time she stayed longer, started asking questions. How long you been working metal? Since I was 10. My father started teaching me young. He teach you well. He tried. I'm probably better with steel than I ever was with conversation. Kyle laughed at his own joke. She didn't. Nothing wrong with that. Warriors talk too much. Makes them slow. I suppose that makes sense. Another visit. You work alone? Yes. Had an apprentice once, but he moved to the capital. Better opportunities there. You get lonely? Kale paused his hammering. The question caught him off guard. I never really thought about it. The work keeps me busy. And I like the quiet. Lets me think. Quiet is good. But the way she said it sounded almost sad. 6 months crawled by like a wounded animal. The seasons turned from summer's brutal heat to autumn's gentle cooling. The leaves in Thornhaven turned gold and red and fell like copper coins scattered by a generous hand. And Grisha kept coming back. Sometimes she brought weapons. Sometimes she didn't. Sometimes she'd just appear in the doorway, block out the sun with her considerable frame and say, "Thought I'd check on that sword from last month." Kale would show her the sword, which was hanging on the wall where she'd left it after deciding she didn't actually need it repaired after all, and she'd nod slowly, thoughtfully, like she was seeing it for the first time. Then she'd stay, for hours, watching him work, occasionally asking questions, more often just present. Elena, the baker's daughter, started hanging around the forge too. She was 16, red-haired, romantic in the way only teenage girls can be, and absolutely fascinated by Grisha. She'd perch on the fence outside like a crow, watching through the window, collecting scraps of metal Kale threw out. and turning them into crude jewelry. One afternoon, while Grisha was inside examining a shield that didn't need examining, Elena whispered to Kale, "She likes you." "Who? Commander Grisha? Of course she likes me. I do good work." Elena stared at him with the unique exasperation of youth confronting stunning adult stupidity. "Not your work, you absolute brick. She likes you." That's ridiculous. She's a customer. A very good customer, actually. Very loyal. She's here 3 times a week. She has a lot of weapons." Elena looked like she wanted to hit him with one of those weapons. "She brings you things. Gifts. She pays me for services rendered. That's not gifts. That's commerce. The bone carvings, the tribal tea, the leather bracelet with her clan symbol, those aren't payments. They're—" Elena made a frustrated sound. "You're hopeless. Completely hopeless." It was true that Grisha had started bringing things that weren't weapons, small items that Kyle accepted politely and set on a shelf, not really understanding their significance. The first bone carving appeared on his workbench after one of her visits. A small wolf, intricately detailed, no bigger than his thumb. When he asked about it next time, she'd shrugged. "Good luck charm. Warriors carry them." "Should I carry it? If you want." He put it on the shelf next to his father's old tongs. The tribal tea came a month later, a pouch of dried leaves that smelled like pine and something spicy he couldn't identify. "From the mountain clans," she explained. "Good for warming blood in winter." "That's very kind. I'll try it." He never did. It sat on the shelf next to the wolf carving. The leather bracelet was the most recent gift, thick, well-made, with her clan symbol burned into the leather, a bear skull with crossed axes behind it. She'd set it on his workbench without comment while he was in the middle of tempering a sword. "What's this?" he asked, not looking up from his work. "Bracelet. I can see that. Why?" Silence. When he finally glanced over, she was staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Frustration? Disappointment? With orcs, it was hard to tell. Their faces weren't built for subtle emotions. "Thought you might wear it," she said finally. "Oh, that's thoughtful. Thank you." He set down his tongs, examined the bracelet. "The craftsmanship is excellent. Really well made. Did you make this?" "Yes. The leather work is remarkable. See how the edges are beveled? And the stitching is so tight you can barely see it. This must have taken hours. 3 days. 3 days? For a bracelet." Kale was genuinely impressed. "That's dedication." She made a sound that might have been agreement or might have been something else entirely. Hard to say. "I'll put it with the other things you've given me," Kale said cheerfully, setting it on the shelf. "I really should build a better display case. Your gifts deserve proper presentation." If looks could have melted steel, Kale would have been a puddle on his own forge floor. But the gift he remembered most, though he wouldn't understand why until much later, was the iron rose. It happened during one of her earlier visits, back when he still thought she was just an unusually dedicated customer. She'd brought a battle axe that allegedly needed sharpening, and while Kale worked, she'd asked about his techniques. "How you make the steel so smooth?" She ran one massive finger along a finished sword blade hanging on the wall. "Lots of polishing. And patience. You can't rush good steel. It's like—" Kale paused, trying to find the right metaphor. "It's like courting, I suppose. You have to work slowly, pay attention, be gentle even though you're working with something strong." Grisha's head snapped toward him so fast he heard her neck crack. "You court often?" "What? No, God, no. I barely have time to eat, let alone—" "I just meant metaphorically. I've never actually courted anyone. I was just trying to explain the metalwork process." "Ah." Was it his imagination, or did she sound relieved? While her axe heated in the forge, Kale found himself with spare time and a small scrap of iron that wasn't good for anything practical. So he did what he always did with spare time and spare materials. He created something unnecessary and beautiful. The rose took shape under his hammer. Small petals, carefully curved, a delicate stem, even tiny thorns, each no bigger than a grain of wheat. He lost himself in the work, forgetting Grisha was there, forgetting everything except the metal and what it could become. When he finished, he held it up to the light. The petals caught the glow from the forge, each one a different shade of gray and black depending on how the heat had tempered it. Imperfect, asymmetrical, beautiful. "Here." He offered it to Grisha without thinking. "For you." She stared at the tiny rose in his soot-stained palm, like he'd just offered her a dragon's heart. "For me? Just a scrap piece. I make them sometimes when I'm thinking through a problem. Helps my hands stay busy. You can keep it if you want, or I can toss it in the scrap bin, either way. Her massive hand reached out, slowly, carefully, like she was afraid the rose would disappear if she moved too quickly. When she picked it up, the tiny flower looked absolutely ridiculous in her palm, like a fairy tale prop, like something that shouldn't exist. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Cale had never heard her whisper before, didn't know she could. "It's just scrap metal shaped into something pretty, but I'm glad you like it." She closed her fingers around it, gently, so gently that he realized with a start that she could crush it to powder without any effort at all, but she wouldn't. She was holding it like it was made of glass and prayers. "I'll treasure it," she said. That's a bit dramatic for a piece of scrap metal, but sure. I'm happy you have it." If Grisha's expression shifted into something that looked like pain, Cale didn't notice. He was already turning back to her axe, checking if it had reached the right temperature for quenching. 8 months into their strange routine, Thara started accompanying Grisha to the forge. Thara was Grisha's second in command, younger, shorter, only 6'4", practically tiny for an orc, with a vertical scar that split her upper lip and left one tusk permanently exposed. She had nervous energy that manifested in constant weapon maintenance. While Grisha watched Cale work, Thara would sit outside and polish her sword with obsessive intensity, the scrape of whetstone on steel providing an aggressive soundtrack to Cale's hammer rhythms. "Your boss comes here a lot," Cale mentioned one afternoon when Thara followed him outside to the water barrel. Thara looked at him, looked at the forge where Grisha was examining a shield, looked back at him. "You really don't know." "Don't know what?" "Nothing." Scrape, scrape, scrape. Her whetstone attacked the sword with renewed violence. "Absolutely nothing." "Are you upset about something?" "Me? No. Why would I be upset? Just watching my commander waste 8 months on a human who has the romantic awareness of a particularly stupid rock. I'm sorry? You should be." Scrape, scrape, scrape. "That thing she wears around her neck, under her armor. You know what it is?" "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Of course you don't." Thara's scar pulled when she sneered, making her exposed tusk jut out even further. "The little iron flower, the one you gave her as scrap. She wears it every day, every single day, against her heart, under her armor, where it's safe." Something cold started forming in Cale's stomach. "She kept that? Kept it? She cried when you gave it to her. Actual tears. You know how rare it is to make a warrior cry? She went back to camp and cried like she'd won a battle and lost it at the same time. I don't understand." Clearly, Thara stood, sheathing her now overly polished sword. "Let me make it simple. My commander doesn't need weapons sharpened 3 times a week. Her axe was perfect when she brought it to you the first time. The sword didn't have a loose pommel. The dagger didn't need rebalancing. Then why? Because she wanted to see you, you absolute fool." Thara's voice had risen to something close to a shout. "Because she's been courting you for 8 months in the only way she knows how, and you've been treating her like a customer who pays well." The world tilted slightly. Kyle grabbed the water barrel for support. "Courting? But she never said. She brought you clan tea. She gave you her clan bracelet. She carved you a protection wolf with her own hands." "These aren't random gifts. They're courtship traditions. Each one is supposed to be a bigger declaration than the last." "How was I supposed to know that?" "Because she lingered. Because she asked about your life. Because she looked at you like you were the only thing in the room worth looking at." Thara was definitely shouting now. "Because any person with eyes and half a brain would have noticed." Kyle's mind was racing, flipping through 8 months of interactions, seeing them all in horrifying new context. The questions, the visits, the gifts, the way she'd watch him work with an expression he'd interpreted as professional interest, but might have been something entirely different. "I have to talk to her," he said. "Good luck with that." Thara mounted her horse, a massive beast that still looked small under her. "She's been trying to talk to you for 8 months. You're terrible at listening." But Cale didn't talk to her. Because he panicked. Because suddenly everything felt different and he didn't know how to act around her anymore. Because the next time she came to the forge, 3 days later, with a spear that felt unbalanced, he couldn't stop stammering like a nervous child. "Commander, Grisha. Hello, welcome, to the forge, which you've been to before. Obviously, many times." She set the spear down, frowning. "You well?" "Me? Yes, fine. Completely fine. Normal. Very normal. How are you?" "Fine." Silence fell like an avalanche. Kyle picked up the spear, put it down, picked it up again. Grisha watched him with increasing concern. "The spear is fine," Kyle blurted. "Like all your weapons. They're always fine. They don't need repair. Thara told me. About the gifts, about the courtship, about everything." Grisha went very, very still. The kind of stillness that predators have right before they strike. "I see. I didn't know. I should have known, but I didn't, and I'm sorry, and I don't know what to do with this information, and—" "Stop talking." He stopped. She stood there, this massive warrior who had faced down armies, looking more vulnerable than he'd ever seen her. Her hands clenched and unclenched at her sides. Her tusks caught the forge light. Her amber-green eyes were bright with something that might have been tears but couldn't be because warriors didn't cry. "You don't feel the same," she said. Not a question, a conclusion. "I don't know what I feel. I work with metal, Grisha. I understand temperatures and carbon content and quenching rates. I don't understand people. I especially don't understand this. Understanding not required." Her voice had gone flat, professional, the voice of a commander giving orders. "Feeling is simple. Either you do or you don't. But I don't know. Then you don't." She turned toward the door. "I won't return." "Wait. I said I won't return." She didn't look back. "Find another customer for your excellent work, Blacksmith Kale." And she left. The forge suddenly felt enormous and empty, like a cathedral built for a god who'd abandoned it. Kale stood there holding a perfectly balanced spear that had never needed balancing, surrounded by gifts whose significance he'd missed, and understood for the first time that the ringing sound of his hammer might have been the loneliest sound in the world. 1 week passed, then 2, then 3. The forge's rhythm didn't change. Kyle still woke before dawn, still heated the coals, still worked until his arms ached and his eyes burned from smoke. The hammer still sang against the anvil. Same clear note, same perfect pitch. But it felt wrong. Everything felt wrong. Old Merrick noticed first. Click, click, click. "You look like death walked over your grave and decided to move in." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You look like you're beating that steel like it insulted your mother." Click, click, click. "Orc Commander hasn't been around." "No." "You going to tell me why?" "No." Click, click, click. "You're an idiot." "Probably." Merrick dumped the coal with enough force to create a black cloud that covered half the forge. When Kale stopped coughing, the old man was already gone. Elena was less tactful. She stormed into the forge one afternoon, all righteous 16-year-old fury, and announced, "You broke her heart." "I didn't mean to." "Do you think that matters? Do you think intentions mean anything when you've crushed someone who probably hasn't let herself be vulnerable in her entire adult life? She'll be fine. She's a warrior. She's strong. Strong people break too. They just break quieter." Elena picked up the wolf carving from the shelf. "Do you even know what this means in orc culture? It's a promise of protection. When someone gives you this, they're saying, 'I'll keep you safe from the world.' She wanted to protect you. I don't need protection. Everyone needs protection sometimes. Everyone needs someone who looks at them and thinks, 'I'd fight the world for this person.' And you had that. Someone who'd carved you a promise with her own hands. And you put it on a shelf like it was a paperweight." Elena shoved the wolf carving back among the other forgotten gifts and left, slamming the door hard enough to make the walls shake. Kale stood in the ringing silence, looking at the shelf, the wolf, the tea, the bracelet, the empty space where Grisha used to stand, taking up half the room and all the air, and somehow making the forge feel less lonely instead of more crowded. He picked up the bracelet, examined it in the dying afternoon light. 3 days of work, she'd said. 3 days cutting and stitching and burning her clan symbol into leather just to give him something she hoped he'd wear. He put it on. It fit perfectly. A month after Grisha stopped coming, Kale stopped sleeping. He'd lie in the small room above the forge, staring at the ceiling, replaying conversations, seeing them differently now, understanding too late. "You get lonely?" She'd been asking if he wanted company. "Thought you might wear it." She'd been asking him to show the world he was claimed, protected, hers. "I'll treasure it." She'd meant it, every word. And he'd given her a piece of scrap metal while he'd given her crafted devotion. The worst part was the rose. He couldn't stop thinking about the rose. He tried making another one, spent 6 hours creating an iron flower even more detailed than the first. But it felt hollow. Wrong. Because he'd made the first one without thinking, in a moment of pure creative joy, while Grisha watched. He'd made it and handed it over like it was nothing, and to her it had been everything. He destroyed the second rose with his hammer, turned it back into scrap, because that's all it was without her there to give it meaning. Thara showed up on a cold October morning, mounted on her massive horse, looking like she'd rather be literally anywhere else. "She's not well," Thara said without preamble. Cale's heart dropped into his boots. "Is she injured?" "Worse. She's heartbroken. Do you know what that does to a warrior? Makes them reckless, makes them stupid. Last week she volunteered for border patrol in the contested territories. Alone. She's taking on jobs that should require a whole squad. She's going to get herself killed." "Yes, probably. And she doesn't seem to care." Thara's hand moved to her sword, that nervous habit, but she stopped herself. "I thought you should know, since you're the reason. What am I supposed to do?" "I don't know. Apologize? Grovel? Beg? Tell her you were an idiot and you're sorry?" Thara's scar pulled tight. "Or don't. Let her throw herself at enemies until one of them gets lucky. Either way, I've delivered my message." "Wait, where is she?" "Why, so you can break her heart again?" "So I can fix what I broke." Thara studied him for a long moment. Then, grudgingly, "The northern border, 3 days' ride, the old watchtower near the Iron River. That's where she's been stationed." "Thank you." "Don't thank me. If you hurt her again, I'll kill you myself. Slowly, with a dull knife." "Fair enough." Cale had never left Thornhaven. Not in 28 years. The forge was his world, 4 walls and a hearth and an anvil that had shaped his entire existence. But some things were worth leaving for. He locked the forge for the first time in his adult life, packed a bag with supplies he probably wouldn't need and forgot supplies he definitely would. Left a note for Merrick explaining that he'd be gone for a week, maybe more, and could he please keep an eye on the place. Elena found him trying to saddle a horse, a task he'd never performed before, and was executing with all the grace of a drunk octopus. "You're going after her?" "Yes. You don't know how to ride." "I'll learn." Elena smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her in weeks. "You really love her, don't you?" Kyle paused, one foot in a stirrup, finally understanding the question that had haunted him for a month. "I think I've loved her since she first walked into my forge and demanded I sharpen a blade that didn't need sharpening," he said quietly. "I was just too stupid to know what it felt like." Elena helped him with the saddle, showed him how to hold the reins, how to sit, how to make the horse go in the direction he wanted instead of the direction it wanted. By the time he left Thornhaven, he looked only slightly ridiculous instead of completely incompetent. The 3-day journey took him 4.5. He got lost twice, fell off the horse once, and spent one memorable evening huddled in a cave while a storm tried to drown the entire world. But he kept going, following the directions Thara had given him, following the Iron River north until the watchtower appeared on the horizon like a broken tooth against the sky. It was late afternoon when he arrived, exhausted and sore and covered in mud from the fall. The tower stood alone on a rocky outcrop, surrounded by nothing but wind-bent trees and the endless sound of the river rushing over stones. Grisha sat outside the tower, sharpening a sword that definitely didn't need sharpening. She looked up when his horse stumbled to a stop. Those amber-green eyes went wide with surprise, then narrowed with something that might have been anger, or might have been pain, or might have been hope dying before it could fully form. "Blacksmith," her voice was ice. "You're far from your forge." "I know. Why are you here?" Cale dismounted, more fell than climbed, and stood there like an idiot, holding the reins, not sure where to start or how to explain or what words existed that could possibly convey everything he needed to say. So he started with the truth. "I kept the wolf carving by my bed," he said, "after you stopped coming. I moved it from the shelf to the table where I could see it first thing when I woke up, because I realized it wasn't a gift. It was a promise, and I was a fool to put promises on shelves like they don't matter." Grisha's hand stilled on the sword. She didn't look at him. "I drink the tea now," Kyle continued. "Every morning. It tastes like pine and smoke and something I can't identify. It's bitter and strange, and it makes me think of you every single time. Kyle, I wear the bracelet. See?" He held up his wrist, where her clan symbol sat against his skin. "I should have worn it the day you gave it to me. Should have understood what it meant. Should have understood what you meant." "Why are you here?" She repeated the question, but her voice had lost its ice. "Because I'm an idiot who understands metal better than people." Because I didn't know what courtship looked like when it was standing in my forge taking up space and asking about my life. Because I gave you a scrap metal rose and didn't realize I was giving you my heart. Silence. The river rushed. The wind moved through the trees. Grisha's hands trembled, just slightly, barely visible. But Cale had spent 8 months learning to notice the small things about her. Too late. Always too late. You don't mean that, she said finally. I rode for 4.5 days to tell you I mean it more than I've meant anything in my life. You fell off your horse. She gestured at the mud covering his left side. Only once. You don't know how to ride. I learned. Badly, but I learned. Why? The question came out broken. Vulnerable. Why now? Why after all this time would you? Because I miss you. The words came out simple and devastating. Because the forge is empty without you. Because every time I hear the hammer ring against the anvil, I remember that's when you'd look up and smile. Because I spent 8 months taking you for granted, and 1 month understanding what it feels like to lose something precious. Grisha stood, all 7 feet of her, armored and scarred and terrifying and beautiful. She could have killed him with one hand, could have thrown him off the cliff into the river, could have laughed at his mud-covered, pathetic attempt at a grand gesture. Instead, she reached into her armor and pulled out a chain. At the end of it hung a tiny iron rose, slightly bent, precious beyond measure. I thought about throwing it in the river 100 times, she whispered. Every time it hurt to look at it. Every time I remembered you called it scrap. It wasn't scrap, it was never scrap. Kyle took a step closer. She didn't move away. I made it while you were there because something about your presence made me want to create beautiful things. I gave it to you because even then, before I understood anything, I wanted you to have something made just for you. You said it was nothing. I'm an idiot. We've established this. You are. But the corners of her mouth twitched. Almost a smile. Coming all this way. Can't even ride a horse properly. I'd walk back if the horse died. I'd crawl if my legs broke. I'd drag myself through snow and mud and every impossible mile between here and Thornhaven if it meant I could tell you one more time. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I was blind. I'm sorry I wasted 8 months of courtship not understanding I was being courted by someone extraordinary. I'm sorry. She kissed him, or tried to. The height difference made it complicated. She had to bend down while he stood on his toes, and even then it was awkward and weird, and her tusks bumped his cheek and his nose bent against her face. It was the best moment of his entire life. When they broke apart, she was crying, actually crying. Tears running down green cheeks, catching in the edges of her tusks, glittering like diamonds in the fading light. I thought I'd lost you, she said. You never had me to lose. I had to figure out I was already yours. They sat together on the rocks as the sun set over the iron river. Grisha's hand completely engulfed Cale's, warm and rough and perfect. She told him about 8 months of hope and frustration. He told her about 1 month of realization and regret. What happens now? She asked as stars began appearing in the darkening sky. I don't know, Kyle admitted. I've never done this before. Any of this. Neither have I. She squeezed his hand gently, so gently, always afraid her strength would hurt him. But we figure it out together. Yes? Yes. They rode back to Thornhaven together, Kyle on his horse, Grisha on hers, moving slowly because Kyle still didn't really know how to ride and Grisha refused to leave him behind. The journey took 6 days. The longest, best 6 days of Kyle's life. When they arrived back at the forge, Elena and old Marek were waiting outside. Elena squealed like she'd witnessed a miracle. Marek just clicked and said, "About damn time." A year passed like water flowing over stones, constant, shaping everything it touched. Grisha moved into the room above the forge. Had to duck for every doorway. Couldn't fit in Cale's old bed, so they built a new one together. Left weapons leaning against walls because she could never be fully unarmed, and he learned that was okay. She still brought him weapons. But now, when she set a sword on his workbench and said, "Needs sharpening," he'd test the edge, look at her with mock seriousness, and reply, "This blade is perfect and you know it." And she'd smile, that rare, precious smile that she saved only for him, and say, "Just wanted excuse to watch you work." The gifts on his shelf multiplied. More carvings. More tea. A belt with her clan symbol. A dagger forged by her own hand. Each one precious. Each one kept exactly where she'd placed it, because Cale had learned that some things belonged on shelves not as forgotten objects but as honored treasures. He made her things too. Iron flowers, yes, but also a hairpin engraved with her name in her native language. A bracelet that matched his butt-sized for her massive wrist. Small sculptures of wolves and bears and dragons that he'd craft while she watched, just to see her smile. They fought sometimes, about stupid things, about serious things, about the fact that she'd volunteer for dangerous missions without telling him, or that he'd work himself to exhaustion and forget to eat. But they'd learned how to fight like they'd learned how to love. Messily, honestly, with the understanding that some things were worth the struggle. Old Merrick officiated their bonding ceremony. Click, click, click. Never thought I'd see the day a human married an orc, but here we are. Strange world. Beautiful, though. Elena cried through the entire event. Happy tears. The kind of tears romantics cry when they watch impossible love become possible. Thara stood as Grisha's witness, still clicking her tongue in exasperation, but unable to hide her smile. You better take care of her, Blacksmith. She's worth 20 of you. I know, Kale said. I'll spend the rest of my life being worth one of her. The forge changed, became louder, warmer, fuller. Became a place where two worlds met and merged and created something new. Human customers still came. Orc warriors started coming too, drawn by Grisha's presence and Kale's reputation. The Forge of Singing Steel became the Forge of Two Hearts, though the name never officially changed. It didn't need to. Some nights, Kale would wake and find Grisha standing at the window, looking out at the stars, touching the iron rose she still wore against her heart. What are you thinking? He'd ask. That I almost gave up, she'd say. After 8 months, after the 100th hint you missed, I almost stopped coming. What made you keep trying? The rose. She'd turn to him, eyes bright in the darkness. Because you made it without thinking. Made it just to make something beautiful while I was there. That meant something, even if you didn't know it meant something. And Kale would pull her back to bed. Their two-large bed built for warriors and blacksmiths and couples who didn't fit traditional molds. He'd hold her hand, so small in hers, and understand that love wasn't about perfect communication or reading every signal correctly. It was about showing up, keep trying, making things beautiful just because someone you cared about was in the room. It was about second chances and iron roses and warriors who courted with weapons they didn't need sharpened. It was about being brave enough to be vulnerable, smart enough to realize when you've been stupid, strong enough to ride 4.5 days on a horse you couldn't properly control just to say, I'm sorry, I love you, I finally understand. The forge still sings, same clear note, same perfect rhythm, but it's not lonely anymore. It never will be again. Here's the question nobody asks when they hear this story. What would you have done? If someone courted you in a language you didn't speak, would you have figured it out faster than Kale? Or would you have been just as blind, missing every hint until it was almost too late? Sometimes the bravest thing a warrior can do isn't fighting. It's trying again after being hurt. And sometimes the bravest thing anyone can do is admitting they were wrong, even if it means riding 4.5 days through mud and rain to say it. Because in the end, love isn't about perfect understanding. It's about choosing to try, choosing to learn, choosing to show up even when you're terrified you're too late. Blood makes you orc. Loyalty makes you human. But love makes you brave enough to be both.